What is the message art and why it saved my life?
Hi, my name is Giselle, and I'm the artist behind the message art, which is the gift I received after weeks of asking God for help that not only positively changed my life, it saved my life. My story begins in the fall of 1999 when I first asked for divine help while journaling. I'd been struggling with a severe addiction to VLTs, or video lottery terminals, for over 4 years and experiencing constant guilt, fear, anxiety, and depression. VLTs are a type of slot machines which the government brought into most communities across Canada in the early 1990s. Their purpose, we were told, was to raise funds for things like better education, healthcare, and children's services, and also for many charity groups across Canada to raise funds. Almost every night of every week, I would leave either a bar or casino after losing all the money I had in my purse, plus whatever I could pull out of the ATM machines from my bank accounts and a couple of Visa cards. While walking to my car, I would profusely berate myself for being so weak and so stupid. I would then get in, slam the door shut, and after driving far enough so no one could hear me, I would scream as loud as I could until my head felt like it would explode. Once back home, I would take a quick bath, get in my PJs, reach for my notebook, and light up a candle. The first sentence I would write is, "God, please, please help me. I truly don't know how much longer I can do this." After journaling for 30 minutes, or sometimes for hours, I would go to bed crying, promising myself to never, ever go back to play the machines. Only to wake up the next morning to repeat the same cycle of insanity all over again. By that time, my addiction had not only affected my health negatively, but very much so my marriage and a few of my closest relationships. I had lost hundreds of thousands of dollars, had attended my government's treatment program, GA support groups, read many books on addiction, and also gone for private counseling. Nothing I did during the previous 2 years had even come close to ending my constant and overpowering urges to go play gambling machines at least once a day. I was quickly losing hope and beginning to think that the only way out of my addiction was to end my life. One night, late in the fall of that same year, after about an hour or so of writing in my journal, I received a most unusual request from whom I believed to be God. Would I accept to receive and paint some message art? Having no idea what message art meant or what this request would entail, my answer was immediate. "Sure, God, I can do that for you. That's the least I can do after all the help that you've given me in the past." I realized that to some people, the idea that I received a direct request from God may seem ludicrous. I'll be the first to admit that a couple decades ago, I'd have thought anyone making that claim was out of their minds. Although I had a lot of faith in the power of prayer, never in my wildest dreams would I have ever imagined or even believed that I could have a two-way conversation with God. That, contrary to what I'd often been told since I was a little girl, God can and does indeed talk back to us, and without the need for a spiritual translator or a go-between. As a matter of fact, the only reason I was able to hear the special request that night was because I'd been practicing how to get out of my own mind. In other words, how to allow God and my angel Sandra's thoughts to replace my own whenever I felt their presence near me. A couple months before, Sandra had helped me to understand that because human beings are spirits having a physical experience, their two-way conversation with God and their divine helpers are the most normal, loving, and empowering experiences they can ever have while on earth. And that many more humans communicate with the spirit world than we think, and at different times, for example, while meditating, dreaming, walking in nature, and even when in the process of creating something. A couple of mornings after accepting God's request, a sketch of an odd-shaped figure kept flashing in my mind. Because of its simplicity, I ignored it, but the image persisted throughout the day, much like a child constantly tugging at my sleeve until they're acknowledged. I finally sketched the image on paper later that afternoon, before going to town, and about 2 miles from home, I noticed the nudging had disappeared. By noon the next day, I realized this sketch was part of the message art I had accepted to paint, but to be honest, I was quite disappointed. Since this art was coming from God, I had expected to be grandiose and spectacular in nature, like Michelangelo's paintings. I knew I wasn't that talented, but God was helping me, so anything was possible, right? But instead, the image was simple and unlike anything I had ever seen, or was painting at the time, such as the 3 canvases I display here. Once I was able to push my inflated ego aside and accepted my lack of understanding, I remembered my promise to God of not questioning anything I received and knew intuitively that I would be guided. Over the course of 1 year and 3 months, I received 15 images and painted each one on a large canvas. Throughout that time and for several years after, my addiction not only persisted, it grew in severity. I felt even more lost and confused than before asking for divine help, and without realizing the significance of what I was doing, I stored the whole collection. Early one evening, about 2 years later, I was told that if I wanted to receive the message for each message art painting, I needed to sit in front of each one and meditate until the information came to me through my thoughts. I did as I was told, but in the only way that I knew how to meditate. I grabbed my pen and notebook and quickly wrote, "God, keep me in your light always and lead me to my purpose on earth." The same words I'd been writing for a couple of years each time I journaled. The images on the canvases seemed so childlike and simple, but after weeks of writing down the information I was receiving, I realized there was a deeper meaning for each line, color, and shape in the paintings. Each one was intended to convey a specific divine message. Receiving the whole of each painting's message and fully understanding their meaning was a long and sometimes frustrating process. Patience had never been one of my virtues, so I often put myself down for not being able to receive the whole of one painting's message all at once, instead of only in bits and pieces. It wasn't until months into this process and repeatedly asking for guidance that Sandra explained to me in a most loving way that the reason some of the messages had to come to me in small pieces at a time was because I wasn't spiritually capable of receiving them all at once. In the same way, I couldn't possibly grasp a grade 12 math when only in grade 1. The more I allowed my mind to open, the clearer and more in-depth the messages revealed themselves, and the sooner I was able to grasp their meaning and finally apply them to my everyday life. Sandra also explained that another reason it wasn't going as fast as I had expected it to go was because some of the messages challenged my deeply ingrained God-fearing beliefs and ideas. Some of those beliefs were easy to let go, but others took months and even years for me to reprogram with the ever so loving, guilt-free, and empowering messages I had received. During that time, it often felt like I'd been gifted a massive master puzzle made up of 15 smaller puzzles. Each time I unknowingly forced a piece where it didn't belong, in other words, tried to fit a message to the wrong painting, the strong nudging sensation came back, and I knew I had no choice but to be patient until I received more guidance. Sometimes the nudging would persist for weeks, and other times the messages didn't become clear until years later. But my persistence paid off, and I began to notice that the message art was having a profound effect on my being and on my life. Although I didn't recognize it at first, its messages were slowly but dramatically transforming the way I perceived myself, the world around me, and God. As my perception changed, so did my beliefs. And because my beliefs determined the outcome of my experiences, everything in my life was changing in a positive way, including my relationship with God. Something else was happening in my life when I was intermittently receiving messages and still struggling with my addiction. In the spring of 2002, 1 year after storing the Messenger collection, I began to feel intuitively nudged to start researching the machines that were still destroying my life. These nudges were as strong and persistent as those that I had experienced whenever a new image or message for a painting showed up in my mind. By then, I knew where these types of nudges came from, and there was no use in ignoring them, so I began to extensively research everything I could find about my government's gambling machines. 7 years later, on May 9, 2009, my constant urges to go play them ended for good. I'll never forget that day because while reading yet another report of the hundreds I had gathered from experts all over the world, it was like a light bulb suddenly lit up in my head. For the first time in over 10 years, I could see the light at the end of the long and very dark tunnel I had stepped into the first time I played VLTs locally. After a decade of profusely berating and hating myself for not being able to quit playing these machines, going for help, and filling up over 24 notebooks with research notes and my journals, I had discovered the reason why I could no longer recognize the person I saw in the mirror. My behavior had been programmed into one of an addict in the same way a lab rat can be programmed with the use of rewards to repeatedly push a button to the point of exhaustion. The only difference is that I had repeatedly and excessively pushed the spin buttons on machines to the point of emotional, physical, spiritual, and financial exhaustion. In other words, I had discovered that an addiction to gambling machines is not a disease that cannot be cured, but rather a programmed behavior that can end for good when the addicted players are told the truth, that the machines are specifically designed for player extinction, and that anyone who plays these machines as they were intended to be played becomes addicted, no matter what age or who they are, what they do, or how educated they are. Later that same day, I drew this cartoon and have since kept a copy of it in my purse as a reminder. I've also made many prints of it to give out to other players I've since helped. This image not only reflects so perfectly what happens to regular players of gambling machines, it also serves as a reminder of the most important discovery I made, one that some of my government's researchers had known for decades. It isn't the players of machines who are sick, but rather it is the machines that are making them sick. The more I played, the sicker and weaker I got, and the more severely I beat myself up for not being able to quit playing. The weaker I got, the less power I had to fight off the urges to go back, only to return and lose even more money, followed by hating myself even more. Had I not been divinely guided to discover this truth, I wouldn't be alive to share it on this video. My experience as a player turned researcher, the alarming discoveries I made about gambling machines, and the reason I have since called these machines unconscionable fundraisers for any government or charity group, are in the book I wrote with my daughter Dana, titled Dismiss. It took me 14 years to fully realize that the Messenger collection and its divine messages had been one of the major ways God had been sending me the help I so desperately needed. It's humbling to think that for most of that time, I truly believed I was the one doing God a favor by painting this unique art collection. The persistent nudges which intermittently kept showing up before and during my 7-year research was yet another way God had been helping me to survive my addiction. Without these two major gifts, I wouldn't have found inner peace or developed the profound, loving, and non-fearing relationship I've since had with God. But even more important, I wouldn't have attained all the spiritual wisdom that I did through the profound insights conveyed by the 15 message art paintings. Wisdom that I've begun to share with the world through some of the videos on my YouTube channel and through the message art study and private counseling for those who want a more in-depth study of the messages. What still amazes me, even after all those years, is how all of my spiritual questions were answered through the profound insights conveyed by the message art paintings, including those I'd been asking since I was a little girl. I now know that until the day I die, whenever a new spiritual question enters my mind, the answer will find its way to me as soon as I allow God's thoughts to replace my own. My intent in sharing my story is to inspire others to embark on a special journey so they may find their own truth, profound inner peace, and unconditional self-love. I have no doubt that in doing so, they will discover, like I did, the huge difference between believing in God and experiencing God. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please feel free to share it and tell others about the message art.